Hello again, and welcome back to Prophetic Insights. We're examining The Great Reset, a book written by Alex Jones that deals with various topics and subplots of a global conspiracy to take over the world, this global reset and the end of the world. We're going to examine 5 points that Jones presents in his book. The first one, we're going to look at the role of the EU. Secondly, the issue of the Rockefeller Admission. Third, we'll examine Brzezinski's role in the Trilateral Commission and various statements that he made of the plan of the New World Order. Fourth, the role of nuclear weapons in this onslaught. And then fifth, we'll look at the areas of free speech, COVID-19, etc. So let's jump right into it. Much of the book's premise is built off of statements from Patrick Wood, David Rockefeller, Brzezinski, etc. So I want to look at a couple of those as they really set the stage for everything that follows in the book. Notice on page 52, Jones states that one of the plans of the New World Order is seen in the building of the European Union, and that in the EU, that essentially none of the states have sovereignties. In fact, I quote as follows: probably the best example today is the European Union. The EU has taken over virtually every single facet, a function of the countries that it presides over. You can say on one hand, there's still a national government in Spain, Switzerland, and Germany. Yes, there is. But do they have the same power today that they had, say, 30 years ago? No, of course they don't. The EU is now making all of the significant policy decisions for Europe for those individual countries. This has been the standard operating procedure for technocracy. To chip away at national sovereignty and eventually remove the political structure altogether, that's been a goal since the 1930s. As a side note, the emphasis on technocracy is really talking about the digital age that Brzezinski talks about in his book, Between Two Ages. The opinion being is that the global elite have this master plan of using technology to infiltrate and to take over every aspect of human life. And so according to the statement that was read, the EU, this is what their stated purpose is. This is what their goal is. They've stripped these nations of their own national sovereignty. Today, there are currently 27 nations that are part of the EU. They were at 28, but Britain left. By them leaving, then that really jettisons the idea that Jones has presented in his book. If they don't have national sovereignty, then how was Europe able to leave out? Its citizens voted that they wanted to withdraw, and consequently, the people had their voice heard, and England abandoned the EU. Now, on the official website for the European Union, they state their objectives as follows. The Union's purpose is to promote peace, establish a united economic and monetary system, promote inclusion and combat discrimination, break down barriers to trade and borders, encourage technological and scientific developments, champion environmental protection, and, among others, promote goals like a competitive global market and social progress. So simply put, the EU, this coalition of 27 nations, primarily has several objectives: to tear down trade, remove economic and social barriers, and to promote prosperity within the regions. This doesn't sound anything like what Jones purports. In fact, again, I stress that these nations still maintain their sovereignty. The EU has nothing at all to do with various conflicts that take place within the countries and so forth. It's designed then to remove hostilities from nation to nation, et cetera. Each nation has to work out its own pathway in achieving the objectives that the treaty outlines. Second, Jones builds off of Rockefeller's admission to being a conspiracist or to being a part of the global elite. On page 54, he states the following: for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents such as my encounter with Castro to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe that we are a part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. Jones uses this piece to articulate that this is an admission by Rockefeller, stating that he's a part of this cabal, he's a part of this one world government, a conspiracy to be able to bring all the world together under the banner of Lucifer. And yet what he fails to identify is that Rockefeller is making a point, similar to how people may use words and insinuations to accuse a person, and will label a person a certain way in order to be able to create suspicion around them. And so Rockefeller simply saying that if that's what you want to label me, then I will choose to wear that badge with honor. But it is interesting that Jones omits Rockefeller's following statements in his memoir. In the memoir that Jones quotes from, Rockefeller goes on to state the following. Instead, they want to wall off the United States by rejecting participation in such constructive international activities as the World Trade Organization and the North American Free Trade Agreement, eviscerating the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and assaulting the United Nations. In staking out these positions, the new populists misunderstand history, misconstrue the effectiveness of the international effort that the United States organized and led after World War II, and misjudge the importance of constructive global engagement to our nation's future. Isn't it interesting that this part was completely left out? Why? Because it does not follow off of the train of thought that Jones is seeking to present. Third, Brzezinski's admission. What he states the purpose of the New World Order is. And then on page 63, Jones makes the following statement. But I want to emphasize that he leaves the first statement out that gives context to what is being stated. But he states as follows to prove his point. Brzezinski seems to suggest how this will follow, or how the New World Order will be implemented. Quote, more directly linked to the impact of technology, it involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled and directed society. Such a society will be dominated by an elite whose claim to political power would rest on allegedly superior scientific know-how. Unhindered by the restraints of traditional liberal values, this elite would not hesitate to achieve its political ends by using the latest modern techniques for influencing public behavior and keeping society under close surveillance and control. Now, the sentence that Jones left out is the following. Another threat, less overt but no less basic, confronts liberal democracy. More directly linked to the impact of technology, and then that quotation ensues. In other words, within its context, Brzezinski is not laying out a pathway for a New World Order. Rather, he's talking about what threats are there, what threats exist to society. And a possible threat he's talking about in this technological advancement is the overreaching form of government to possibly try to use surveillance methods and so forth that some would try to twist. Again, a balancing of proper power. Jones doesn't state that. He wants his readers to continue to believe that these are breadcrumbs that the elite are slipping up on and throwing out, or either that they're just so brazen that they're putting out their plan for folks to be able to see it, but only the enlightened ones are able to understand and perceive what their plan is. The tragedy is that anyone who would take maybe 5 minutes would be able to look up these statements in context and to see what the writer is talking about. But many just take a person's opinion. They go to their favorite speaker, their favorite website or presenter, and suggest, well, if this person says it, it must be accurate. I need not check it. The scriptures tell us in the book of Acts, chapter 17, that these were more noble than those in Thessalonica, and that they received the word with all readiness of mind, but they searched the scriptures daily whether these things were so. They didn't just take what Paul said or what Peter said because they were apostles. They listened to it. They appreciated the ministry that these men brought. But there was an onus that was upon them to go back and to check it out, to investigate. The same responsibility rests upon us. We're grateful and indeed living in wonderful times in which people may be able to share and to articulate. But whatever is shared, we must go back and examine it. It was Ronald Reagan who said simply, trust, but verify. We can listen to what a person says, but we have to go back and investigate to see, is that really what this person said? Is that really the context? Is this being misapplied? Is this true to what the teaching is? And if it isn't, then we can reject it. Now, I'll be the first person to say that anyone can misquote, anyone can make a mistake. But when it's called to one's attention, that's really where the litmus test begins. A person is willing to own up to the fact that I made a mistake. I misquoted this. I misunderstood this. To err is human, but to forgive is divine. But to continue to go on in a headstrong direction, even in the light of irrefutable evidence that what has been presented is incorrect, and for someone to then just to stake in that I said it, I'm just going to stick by it regardless, then that's a dangerous situation to be in. And we're called upon now to examine, to test. The word says to prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. So if we test it, we try it out, and it isn't good, it doesn't stand the test of truth, then we need to let it go. Number 4, nuclear weapons. On page 164, Jones uses an editorial to suggest that the global elite are planning a nuclear holocaust or catastrophe. The objective being that if, in the face of climate control, that if a nuclear war were to take place, that it would help to cool off the Earth's temperature. And he does quote an article. However, true to form, what he fails to do is to quote it in its entirety so that the reader is able to really understand what is being communicated. According to Jones on page 164, after talking of the potential of nuclear war, he riles up people by stating the following. So let's have a little laugh while on the subject of the climate change emergency. Now, if you still don't believe that the global elite are deranged lunatics who would trample your basic human rights in the name of saving the planet, get a load of this headline from the Huffington Post. Could a small nuclear war reverse global warming? And then he quotes from some of the article. He then adds in his words, yes, just nuke the world, kill millions of people, and we will have far fewer carbon footprints. What a genius idea by such an acclaimed media outlet. Why didn't we think of this idea earlier? Why isn't every politician just campaigning for global nuclear war as the best way to save the planet and reverse climate change? And again, what he fails to emphasize or to share is the full context of the statement. In its entirety, the statement in Huffington Post says the following. After talking about the, quote, benefits that will be derived from a small nuclear fallout, the editor then comes back and states, the cons seem to outweigh the pros in the event of global cooling caused by even a small nuclear war. I think it's pretty clear that the editor was using hyperbole to be able to make a point or satire, and then coming back to be able to state that even if this was an achievable goal, that it's not worth what we'll end up losing to be able to achieve it. Why isn't that presented is a question. Why aren't the facts laid bare so that the person will be able to see? Well, clearly, if the facts were laid out, it would not follow in the agenda or into the train that the reader is carried on in the Great Reset or the War of the World. Lastly, a number of pages are devoted to the idea of free speech, COVID-19, and the plan of the global elite to take over the world. And yet, once again, in talking of free speech, what Jones fails to realize and to present as facts, there's a lot of opinion, conspiracy, and fear-mongering that is shared. What he fails to share in terms of facts is there is a thing of misinformation. In fact, we've seen a lot of that. It was in the 2020 election, in the aftermath, that Sidney Powell in a lawsuit contended that no reasonable person would believe the claims that she brought. Now, we talk about that in the context of misinformation. Her statement prior to that was that the Dominion software had been bought by Venezuela, that had been hijacked by communists to overthrow the democracy that we enjoy in America. But then her statement in her defense was, hey, no rational person will believe these things that I put forth. Even the plaintiffs that brought the lawsuit, they stood up and they refuted what I was saying. And so our argument is that, well, you shouldn't hold me responsible, you shouldn't hold me liable, because this is really not misinformation, I'm just stating my opinion. And this is much of the same as what Jones is suggesting by the, quote, censoring of big tech, of how they've come forth and said there are certain things that we would not allow to be stated on our platform, particularly as it relates to COVID-19. Now, you can look at a lot of things, whether or not a person agrees or disagrees with vaccinations and so forth. But to state then that if you receive a vaccine, that you're going to have 3 heads sprouting out of your head and so forth, that is misinformation. Now, it's funny. It's sad, though, for people who want to believe it. But if you suggest various things, that is misinformation. If you continue to spread a lie or continue to spread a falsehood when there is no evidence of it, then certainly, again, that falls into the arena of misinformation. And it very likely could fall into the arena of defamation, depending upon what it's brought to or slander, etc. So what we find, in summary, when we look at the book that Jones has presented, The Great Reset, The War of the World, is that the evidence that he presents for this global conspiracy doesn't exist. Again, would encourage you to go back and to take a look at some of the videos that have done on the Illuminati and the idea that there is a global elite group that is seeking to control the world. When we look at the evidence that is presented, there is none that is based in this book or in the various videos and so forth that are shared. Reality reminds us that we are to continue to look to the scriptures. That's going to be our only safety as we navigate through the times in which we live in. To not base our understanding off of what someone suggests and presents, especially when there's no evidence for it, but to find ourselves becoming more rooted and grounded in the word of the eternal God. And so until the next time we're together, may God continue to bless and keep you.